Welcome back, everybody. We have our fifth speaker today, Lisa Kohn. Lisa Kohn is a Unification Church second gen and the award-winning author of To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under the Influence. The best seats Lisa ever had at Madison Square Garden were at her mother's mass wedding, and the best cocaine she ever had was from her father's friend, the judge. Find out more about Lisa in our exhibit hall. Today, Lisa will share her own story of getting unstuck from her past. She will also encourage us to own, integrate, and rise above our stories. Welcome, Lisa Kohn.
Thank you, Janice. Nice to see everyone. Though I can't actually see anyone yet, but nice to be here with you. I am Lisa Kohn. On my day job, I'm a leadership consultant and executive coach and a keynote speaker. And the reality is I am a second-gen Mooney or Unification Church. I have learned to say, yes, I'm a former cult kid more and more often because that truly defines so much of who I am. And Janice already shared with you my best line. Yes, the best seats I ever had at Madison Square Garden when my mom got married there in July 1st, 1982, along with 2,074 other couples, because my mom did join the Unification Church when I was 10. And although I never actually lived in a church center, it was my life, and Reverend Sun Myung Moon was my Messiah. And on the other hand, the best cocaine I ever had was from my father's friend, the judge. And people love that side of the story as well. And yes, he really was a judge. And so, yes, my memoir came out 2 years ago, and I'm going to kind of tell you my story and read to you a couple sections from the book as I tell my story, and then kind of launch into where I went from there and hopefully give you a chance to think about your own stories. I was just saying to Janice and Heather, I heard many years ago when I first started to get help was that we are only as sick as our secrets. And the more I speak it, the healthier for me I become. So that's why I'm here. So the first part here is the prologue. My brother says that we were raised by wolves. I don't always agree with him, but I don't have a more accurate description of our upbringing. A friend of my dad's pointed out that wolves raise their young with more structure than our parents gave us. At first, I had no idea that anything was wrong with my childhood. Yeah, my dad was a hippie bartender who convinced my brother to smoke pot at the age of 10 and who offered to sell me to his friends for drugs. He was kidding. Yeah, I was running the household when I was 11, shopping, cooking, cleaning, because at that point, both my parents were gone. Yeah, my brother and I were left to fend for ourselves way more than you might say is optimal. And yeah, I grew up in a cult. My mom was a Mooney, and therefore so were my brother and I. For those who don't know what that means, the Moonies were members of the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, simply known as the Unification Church, the cult of all cults in the American age of cults. Church members gave their faith, lives, and worldly possessions to a self-proclaimed Messiah from South Korea. Some call it brainwashing. It was my life. I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was bad. When it's all you know, it's all you know. You have no grasp that it could or should be different. I knew I could tell stories about my parents and people would laugh in disbelief. But I was oblivious to the fact that my stories covered up pain and emotional scars, and that much of what happened to me shouldn't have happened at all. I didn't realize I was harmed or that I was on a path of harming myself as I got older. I ended up in abusive relationships, anorexia, and mild drug addiction, to name a few things, but it didn't register that these were because I ate so much inside. I didn't know that my psyche was bruised or that I despised myself. As a kid, you misinterpret the nasty things that happen to and around you, and you somehow believe you're to blame. As a young adult, I internalize this more and more. As an older adult, I still can. I can get lost in darkness and desperation. I can feel unworthy or damaged or hopeless. I have my scars and insecurities, my fears that feel like they'll engulf me. I can be washed over with shame. But they're moments. As I said to my older child once when they struggled against their own demons, the waves of despair become less powerful and hit you less often. I've learned to face my terrors and to allow myself joy. It wasn't always an easy thing to do. I've learned that it's up to each of us to create the life we desire. We have the ability to lessen the influences around us that we don't want or don't agree with. When we can't lessen them, we have the ability to keep going despite them, even when we think we don't. So for a very, very, very long story short, again, my mom joined when we were 10. My older brother and I joined with her. Soon that we were living with my grandfather, and soon after, my mom sat us down and said, I think I need to be more involved. What should I do? And we said, you should leave, go move into the church. And my mom left us with my grandfather and moved into the church, and basically spent most of her time there caring for other people's kids. To this day, I meet a lot of people who say, oh, your mother loved me so much and took such good care of me. And we're living with my grandfather. He's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It happens. We get shuffled around, and I end up in New York City living with my dad. And so my whole life is, I'm a believer. Moon is my Messiah. I actually happen to be best friends with Moon's kid. This is everything I know and love and believe in truth. And my mom. And I live with my dad. I like to say I live with Satan in the life of sex, drugs, and squalor in New York City's East Village in the 70s when it wasn't cool. It was just seedy. And this goes on, and we're going back and forth and kind of hiding both lives from the other life and handling both of them, I guess. And then at the very end of high school, a number of things happened that caused me to question for the first time. Basically, I became friends with people who were gay or bisexual, and my mom said they were sinful, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. And like maybe perhaps many of you, we were literally taught that if we ever questioned anything, it was Satan inside of us trying to win us back from God. So I'm questioning. And at the same time, as I said, I'm best friends with one of Moon's daughters, and something happens. Someone spreads a rumor about me, and Moon hears it and believes it and makes a decree that I can't be with his kids anymore. So I'm questioning, and I know I'm invaded by Satan, and my Messiah has banished me. So he must know I'm invaded by Satan too. And I go into my senior year of high school, starting to pull away a little bit so that I can, I'm thinking I never made a decision, right? I followed my mom when I was 10. When she says it's the Messiah and you bow, it's the Messiah and you bow. And the next thing you know, you believe, right? And there were ways we were obviously conditioned to believe. So I followed my mom into the church as a 10-year-old. So I decided at the age of 17, I needed to pull back a little bit so that I could make an adult decision to come back and never question again. Only I start to experience life on the outside. I spend more time in high school with friends and find more love and unconditional support on the outside than in my cult, which is supposedly about love, and experiment with a couple things and end up experimenting with alcohol and throw a party and get too drunk, and a boy kisses me and I kiss him back, and I have a boyfriend, which is the hugest sin in my puritanical cult, the cause of the fall of man. And so I go to my end year of high school. Every quote in my yearbook is like, what will you do? Of the 5 people who knew, what will you do? What will you do? What will you do? And I go off to college. I go off up to upstate New York at Cornell University. And my boyfriend, Adam, stays in New York City at NYU. And I decide that I will come back to God and to Messiah. And I will not be one of those people who breaks God's heart. I will show up and come back and leave my boyfriend. Only I don't. And this is what happens. At Cornell, they joke about people committing suicide by jumping off the bridges. Someone had painted jumping zones and watching zones on the suspension bridge, and all the freshmen had heard a rumor that you were guaranteed an automatic 4.0 should your roommate jump. Before a stressful exam, Annie and I would teasingly suggest the option to each other in order to win a good grade. These days, they have nets under the bridges as a deterrent and safety measure. Then came the day that option became real. I was heading back to the dorms for my job at a daycare center off campus. On my way home, I took the Stewart Avenue Bridge over Fall Creek Gorge. Halfway across the bridge that afternoon, I stopped and stood still, unable to continue. I gazed down the road toward where I was going and over the railing to the rocks below. I could hear water splashing and, if I listened for it, birds singing in the distance. I could feel the sun beating down. Frozen there, seeing but not seeing, hearing but not hearing, thoughts of plunging to the bottom of the gorge surged inside my head. I know it sounds cliched, but the minutes passed in a super slow motion, and I didn't think I could go on, not the rest of the way across the bridge, and not with my life, after the choices I had made. Each day was taking me further and further from the church and all I had known, believed, and loved. Self-condemnation and remorse simmered inside me like a newly active volcano about to erupt. Everything hurt too much and was way too hard. Way too hard. I stared up at the sky, tears in my eyes, desperate to reconnect with the God I'd known through much of my childhood, longing for the sense of purpose and meaning that has sustained me for so long, begging for the all-consuming doubt and anguish within me to be lifted. High places are known to fill one with an urge to jump, to experience the sensation of falling, called high place phenomenon. But my feelings that day were different. It was almost as if I was empty, with a vacant pit inside me that echoed my torment and despair. I stood there with the gorge below and contemplated the fall. How long would it take? What would it be like? It was a beautiful autumn day. The sun was shining, the leaves were turning, and the air was crisp. I was in my freshman year of college with my future in front of me, but I had no desire to make it to the other side of the bridge. I couldn't choose a path for the rest of my life. I couldn't. Death was the easy, only, and best way out of the situation. If I was dead, I wouldn't be ashamed of failing and walking away from the Messiah and my responsibility. I wouldn't be another person who wasn't strong enough or good enough, who turned against God and killed God's heart. Or I wouldn't have to leave Adam. This would all be done. I stood on the bridge for 10 or 15 minutes, looking over the railing, studying the rocks with their jagged edges and the water calmly bubbling, thinking about the immediate release I would experience. I wanted to fall to my physical death, to avoid falling, having sex outside my blessed marriage, to my spiritual death. Eventually, I turned away and walked back to campus, as if nothing had happened. How? Why? To this day, I don't know. How did I find it in myself to do that? What got me through that moment? Was it what got me through everything leading up to that moment and what would, hopefully, get me through everything else yet to come? I have no idea. People ask me now how I made it through without cracking, without succumbing, without being far too damaged. Again, I just don't know. Maybe I didn't jump to my death that day because jumping would have been admitting defeat, and I was too stubborn for that. Maybe there was a part of me that loved life and that somehow saw some possibility and hope, or some chance for peace, even with my turmoil. Maybe there was a will in me to survive. Maybe I was protected by some greater power in the universe. Maybe I do have a steel rod for a spine. Maybe I'm just lucky. I may have decided not to throw myself over the bridge that day, but I still didn't know how to throw off the shackles of the church, how to lessen its influence and control of my mind and life. I didn't know how to make a final choice to leave, and I didn't know how to be anything but a Moonie. I didn't know what not being a Moonie meant. So I'm going to continue with my story, but first I'm going to come real transparent on you. As a former cult kid, my triggers for guilt and shame and, oh my God, I messed that up are so high. And I didn't share with you my PowerPoint. So I'm going to forgive myself and model everything I've learned and kind of go quickly through it so you can begin to see the pictures. That's me in the Unification Church. It's my mom and dad and my brother and I. This is kind of life, the craziness we lived. Reverend Moon is there on my shirt. I used to go to junior high school with a button of Moon on my shirt. What a great way to go to junior high school. It's my high school friends. And that's me just before I stood there on the bridge that day. So thank you so much for your patience and understanding and my transparency of I messed up. Never easy thing for me as a former cult kid. So I obviously didn't jump off the bridge, and I continued to torment myself. I always like to say I looked so functional on the outside. This is me with my brother as I'm at the end of college, so functional on the outside and so broken on the inside. You know, so my freshman year, there was that moment on the bridge. My sophomore year, I stopped eating, and my anorexia took me about 40 pounds less than I am now. My junior year, I started doing a hell of a lot of cocaine, including with my dad and his friend, the judge. It was at some points the closest I ever was with my father. And my senior year, I just got into more and more and more dysfunctional relationships. Soon after college, I got engaged to someone who drank and drank with my dad, and who was really mean when he drank. And someone I love dearly said, go to Al-Anon, which is that 12-step program for those of us with our arms around the alcoholic, right? And so I crawl into my first meeting thinking only one thing. I'm thinking, tell me if he's an alcoholic, because there's no way I would ever be with an alcoholic because I'm so functional on the outside. And I came to realize that there's so many reasons why I would be with an alcoholic. My dad drank and drug pretty much every day of my life. There's alcoholism and addiction all over his family. And I was raised in a cult, right? And when I left, because I still believed, I just pushed it all away. If I thought about God, I deserved to die. So I just pushed the whole thing away and wouldn't let myself think about it. So I get to Al-Anon and I start telling my story. And as my brother says, when you sit in this room of like hundreds of people and they all have these incredibly tough lives and you tell your story and their jaws all drop, you're like, oh, maybe there's something there. And so I started telling my story and then I became my story. I defined myself by my story. I defined myself by my trauma. I knew I was damaged. I knew I was broken. I knew all that so deeply. And then I slowly started to heal. In fact, one of my first therapists, she said, in order to heal, you have to integrate the church. And first I cursed at her. I'm like, there's no blank in the way I'm ever doing that. I'm only alive because I denied all of it. But for me, I did have to go back and I did have to go and look at things and I did have to tell my story and I did have to find ways to share this and share truths with other people in order for me to heal. And so I'll jump forward to say, and then I'm going to kind of show you some of the things, I'll show you some of the things I've learned. So these are the truths, as opposed to the truth. And I always say to people, there's nothing more intoxicating than knowing you have the truth. Anybody who believed that fervently, who's here in the room with me, know what I mean by that. Like, it is a powerful drug. I've done a few of them. It's a great drug. It's the best drug. It's a lie, but it's an incredible drug, right? But so the new truths that I now know, my truths, that's the cult talking. If you were lucky to hear Jen Kiaba taught this to me, right? And I think her therapist taught it to her. But the ability to call out those lies, I was taught a lot of lies. My brain was pickled and carved intentionally to keep me. And so I had these things happen and I feel damaged or broken, or as my therapist says, why do you ask if you're allowed to do things all the time, right? Like that's the cult talking is a great way to call out what's going on in my brain. There is no such thing as perfection. Blows my mind. And at the same time, I am perfect just as I am, and this moment is perfect just as it is. And you're looking at someone whose brother once said, you even try to do not perfect perfectly. And he's right, and I do. So this is another truth that I am bringing, that I've learned by telling my story and putting my story out there. It has been the most freeing thing, empowering thing for me to do. It all starts with self-love and self-compassion. I do know, I'm an executive coach, so I work with a lot of people, but I also know for myself and all the other survivors I know, so many of us are so hard on ourselves. We're so mean to ourselves. I was telling myself I'm an idiot because I didn't share my PowerPoint. I speak for a living. I know how to, all that stuff. And all we need is a hand on our heart, a la Tara Brach, and a huge dose of self-love and self-compassion, especially if you begin to tell your story, because it can be terrifying. And even now, when I did a keynote 2 weeks ago and people said, oh, I want to watch a keynote. And I sent them the link and then they didn't say anything to me and think, oh my God, they think I'm an idiot. And I've been doing this for decades. I've been telling my story for a long time. So self-love and self-compassion all the time. And my fourth, there is hope and I am not damaged. So, and I said, there's always hope for anyone who feels hopeless or feels damaged beyond repair. There is hope and you are not damaged. I do believe that I still thought I was damaged in 2018 when the book was published. And the reality is I have damage. I have scars. I am a former cult kid. It affects the way I do just about everything. But I am whole and I am beautiful and I'm spectacular and I'm amazing just because I am. And it's really hard to say that, but I'm hoping you're all thinking, and I am too, and are not just, somebody's clapping. So I'm like, okay, you're all hating me for saying that. So these are the new truths that I find are important. So there's not a lot of time, and I'm going to put up a slide that says connect with me at the end, so please do. But where I want to go now is we talked about, I want everyone to be able to own their own stories and see and move past their stories because they're surviving and they're thriving. And I do know that we can thrive even with hard days. So what I want you to think about, and then you're going to have a chance if you want to get into a short breakout group with one other person and just kind of talk about this, and they will not be recorded. Make sure I said that. I want you to think about, what do you need or want to do with your own story to own your story more? What do you need or want to do? What will help you integrate all those parts of you? I had to go back and see things and write things and visit people. And my brother goes, why? But I needed to do that. What will help you integrate? Because all that stuff, if you just push it away, for me, it just came back and ate me up alive. What other parts of you do you want to own and integrate? And what's your next small step for healing and loving yourself more? And I'm looking at 421 because I'm on the East Coast, so 121. But let's maybe take a couple of minutes to think about this, and then we're going to break you into breakup groups with pairs and hope it works. They will not be recorded, and have a chance to have a conversation with one other person, because this is a safe space. These are people who get it, and it can be so healing when someone goes, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I know what you mean. So, and if you don't want to go into breakup, if you want to go in the breakup group, you're going to get invited in and just click go. If you don't want to go, stay here, and then we'll kind of have a conversation in here as well. I think I covered everything I was supposed to cover about that.
Do you do retreats? Do you offer retreats or do group work, or you do the one-on-one coaching?
I do, well, so I do one-on-one coaching, and I do retreats and group work for, like, I was going to say corporate and like corporate work, but I do bring a lot of all my healing stuff into it now that my book is really public. And we were just starting to do second gen groups with ICSA, and then COVID happened and everything got whatever. So yes, not yet, soon.
Yes.
I'm not a licensed counselor. I just have a lot of counseling and a lot of experience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you're the first one that taught me even the term second gen, and it just absolutely fits and makes so much sense.
Like when I heard it in 2018, I was like, oh my God, yeah. And it's that. If you ever get a chance, like I always, when I go to see Nick, like literally we stayed up talking till like 4 a.m. once, because every experience is completely different and exactly the same. Scottish, JW, Mooney, American, same. It's just,
yeah, high control groups for sure. And there is something about being born into it that is different than choosing it for yourself and then walking away. Did it create strife when you were writing To the Moon and Back, and you're talking about, your father, your mother, your brother? Did you have to kind of get to a point where you were just like, this is my story and I'm telling it?
So yes, no. My brother, I left first, then my brother left, and my mom left in 96. My dad was never in. My brother says I got it all wrong. Somewhat jokingly, he has the memory. I don't really have a memory, which is funny because I wrote a memoir. And he says I was way too nice on everyone. And that's what he means. And he means that part. He really does. But he's very clear on that's your story. That's your memory, even the parts you got wrong. And I do apologize because I didn't really think about what I was doing when I wrote it and when I got it published, when I took a long time and I got it out there. And so if you Google me, there's like the first 3 pages is still I come up. If you Google Lisa Kohn, and I go and meet new clients and prospects, and they're like, oh, I read your book. I'm like, great. But if you Google my brother, I also come up. So I outed his life as well. But he's supportive. My mom left in 96. There's a long story to our relationship. She is, on one hand, the biggest supporter of the book, and on the other hand was terrified. She comes to readings. She sits there and sits through them. She looks the worst in this book because I think she was brainwashed, and she did a lot of harmful stuff and let a lot of harmful stuff happen. But again, supportive, even though careful of it. And my father, long story short, did too much cocaine and had a stroke at the age of 64 and is now a very old 78-year-old man in a nursing home. And he knows it's out there, but he lost his eyesight and his ability to hold a book. So he's actually never read it. And he says he wants to, but I'm not sure that I will actually let him, because he does think the worst thing he ever did was leave me with my mom. I always say, what does it mean when both your parents apologize for leaving you with the other one? But so he doesn't act, he knows it's there, but he's never read it. So yeah, but other than that, yeah, not a lot of pushback. That
was just wonderful. Thank you, Lisa, for literally sharing your story with us and your book. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.